later today and probably is closed now. From the levee at Armco, bounded by Keystone Expressway, south bounded by Highway 51 again, with the exception of the Meadow Woods, and that will be backwater. That's always a great difficulty that we have in situations like this. Sand Springs itself, the levee to the river, the areas of Upper Brookside here in Tulsa, that's roughly between 22nd Street and 31st Street, east of the Arkansas River, the Travis Park subdivision in the 31st and Detroit area. So far there has been no residential flooding in there, but these are evacuation sites and water is certainly expected in there at any time. That was where Wendy Burkeen was just reporting from. The West Bank areas, generally 36th to 51st, including the Cherry Creek Mobile Home Park and portions of Garden City, and that again is the only population concentrations on the West Bank area immediately, because that's generally an industrial area with the railroad yards over there and the refineries, of course, and the tank farms. Back on the East Bank, 31st to 43rd along Madison Place. If you live in that area, you realize that Madison Place, which is about halfway between Riverside and Peoria, is one of the lower spots in that area south of 31st. North and west of the intersection of 21st Street and 49th West Avenue, south of 51st to 56th, east of the river to Detroit, and generally the low-lying areas between 61st to 71st along the river. And there's one that I'm not really sure where that one is coming from, 101st to 111th Harvard to the river. Oh, that's out in the, that's actually out in the Jenks, Broken Arrow, Bixby area. And of course, as the flooding continues, the river is going to continue to rise, and it will rise first, of course, in the Sand Springs area, then in Tulsa proper, and then it will move downstream to Bixby, and flooding is also expected, of course, in Bixby and along in the Jenks area, too. The evacuation shelters, as we have them so far, include Central High School, that's out on West Edison, northwest of the downtown area, Webster High School on the city's west side, Nimitz High School, which is generally south, down near that's actually near 56th and Harvard, actually. Holland Hall School out on 81st Street, that in South Tulsa, of course. The downtown Y at 5th and Denver here in Tulsa is also being used as an evacuation center, and over in Sand Springs, the first evacuation center that was opened in the Tulsa metropolitan area, that's the Clyde Boyd Junior High School. Also now in Sand Springs, they have picked up Charles Page School, which is at Adamson Park in Sand Springs, and here in Tulsa, the Brookside Baptist Church Fellowship Hall, that's at 36th and Peoria. That's in the Brookside area, and people in that neighborhood know where that church is. First Baptist Church in downtown Okmulgee is being used as an evacuation shelter for many of the residents in far South Tulsa who are having to get out to safer ground, of course, and as the river takes its turn to the southwest, of course, then Okmulgee is being used now as one of the shelter and evacuation centers. First Baptist Church in downtown Okmulgee, if that's the direction in which you're heading, should be used for that. And here in Tulsa, of course, it's the Central Assembly Church at 5th and Peoria, that north of the Brookside area. And still ahead, Tulsa Run was just a mistake that we just made. We also want to go now to Joe Webb with one other advisory, and perhaps we will talk about this with Joe too, but we have some information about volunteers that are needed to bag sand, and we may ask for your help and assistance on that. Joe Webb has been standing by at the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, during the night. Joe, what can you tell us?
Well, Clayton, we really don't have a whole lot of new information. Most of the stuff that we talked about at 8:45 still holds, except we did get a news release at 9 o'clock from the emergency officials here at the Emergency Operations Center. Just read a little bit of it to you. The latest word from the Corps of Engineers is that the Perkins gauge has been knocked out by debris. Now, this gauge is some sort of flow meter that is in the Cimarron River near Perkins, Oklahoma, which is near Stillwater in north central Oklahoma. It's been knocked out by debris, and it limits the flow of information on the level of water which is going into Keystone, which is causing all of these problems. The Corps is compiling data from other sources, and they're reassessing the information that they have at their command at this time, and they don't expect to release any additional water above the current 220,000 cubic feet per second until at least 10 a.m. I spoke with County Commissioner John Self, who is part of the emergency operations team down here. I talked with him a few minutes ago. He says that we will go to 250,000 cubic feet per second at 10 o'clock. He says it's likely that before it's all over with, the Corps of Engineers will be letting out 300,000 cubic feet per second from the Keystone Dam. If indeed that is the case, the flooding that we've outlined with the maps and the flooding that you outlined with the just a minute ago, those areas that need to be evacuated, they're going to flood, according to the Corps of Engineers. So people need to take heed, because we've got officials down here who are saying we are going to start letting that much water out of the dam, and their data has been pretty accurate to this point. So I think you need to start thinking about moving to higher ground. You talked a little bit about sandbags, and they do need a lot of volunteers to bag sand, because, you know, those things can really stop a lot of water. If you want to bag sand and sandbags are now available at some locations in Tulsa. We've gone over these before, but I'll go over them again. Northwest corner of 3rd Street and Houston, at 51st and Union at the Warehouse Market, 49th and Peoria at the Bel Air parking lot at the Sand Springs Fire Department. Now, if you're going to come to bag sand, please bring a shovel. If you don't have a shovel, show up anyhow. They can use some strong backs and volunteers, and I know that people will show the spirit of Oklahoma and show up and help these people, because we need these bags of sand. The National Guard has been dispatched to these locations to help administer the location, or to administer the operations. A few other things, Clayton. Just a reminder, Bixby City Manager Paul Brignac is stressing that people in Bixby get to higher ground. As Paul Strezik, who has taken over as the spokesman for the emergency operations team, pointed out a little bit earlier, even if you don't have high water now, you probably will later in these areas, and if you don't get out now, there's a good chance that you will have to be evacuated by emergency teams, and these people are going to have plenty to do without getting you out of your house. You can get in your car and drive off, take your time, get to safety so that you won't need emergency help a little bit later. And speaking with Commissioner Self, he also wanted me to remind the viewers that the levee in West Tulsa is strong. It is in no danger of breaking, and it's everything as far as the levee goes is okay. Clayton, we've done a lot of comparisons between this and the flood of 1959. I'm just interested in hearing your observations on that.
Joe, about the only thing that I can recall from the flood of 1959 is that eerie scene along Riverside Drive when the water finally topped Riverside Drive, and then it was backing up because there were no facilities as we have now. It was backing up through the storm sewers. Remember, we were talking about that last night, about that backwash effect. We haven't had any of that today, but what was happening in 1959 was that the river, while it was still within its banks, was actually coming through the storm sewer system and into the Brookside area. So we had a really curious situation in that the river was coming up on one side, and here was Riverside Drive in the middle, and over all of these houses in the Brookside area, essentially everything from about 25th all the way down to 51st. There was water coming up in those too from the river, and then finally, of course, it topped Riverside Drive, and the whole thing was underwater from just a block or two west of Peoria all the way to the West Bank. And at that point, too, it's probably worth noting that there were operating refineries on the west side of the river, and the dikes in that instance held as well. So that information, I'm sure, is very good. One thing I might ask of you, Joe, is that we're going to be on the air here every half hour and every hour with updates. It's about 9:45 now. And perhaps for those of us who came to this late, both as participants and as viewers, it might be well, perhaps at 10 o'clock or in the next hour or so, to go over those maps that are behind you again with the probable flood areas. So next time, perhaps we can do that.
Okay.
And Joe Webb, thank you very much again from City Hall. We do have some more evacuation centers that we have not had time to put up on the screen graphically, but I would like to mention them to you. The First Baptist Church in downtown Sapulpa is now open as a shelter for the evacuees from the Jinx area. That would be very convenient for that. The Leonard Senior Citizens Center building and the First Baptist Church in Leonard are both open now, as is the Airview Assembly of God on Jinx Road and Highway 75. That that is also open. Of course, as this outflow is increased from Keystone Dam, the high water is going to continue to go downstream. Right now, there are no plans to add anything above the current rate of 220,000 cubic feet per second, but as you heard Joe Webb report, it is almost a certainty that that is going to be increased throughout the day. Bear in mind as well, however, that it does take some 6 to 8 hours for that outflow increase to reach the Tulsa stretch of the river, and so there is some time. This is a controlled flood situation, but nevertheless it is a flood, and we advise you to stay tuned throughout the day to Channel 6, where we will have updates for you on the hour and on the half hour, and then again anytime that that information is available that should be passed along. The only evacuation order that we have to pass along to you is the one that we mentioned just off the at the beginning of this broadcast, and that is that there is a mandatory evacuation of Indian Springs 4 edition in Broken Arrow. The police have made that declaration, and they are standing by ready to assist families in that Indian Springs 4 edition to get away. We will be back on the hour. For right now, we rejoin regular programming.
This has been a KOTV News special report. We now return to our regularly scheduled program.